Thank you so much for joining us today, Anika.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Congratulations on your book, Our Sunburnt Country. Oh my God, this is a tour de force. It's a beauty. It's a beautiful book to read, and the concepts are going to be life-changing and have such an impact on so many communities and the country, quite frankly. But I know that's kind of really building it up. Let's just, for listeners who aren't familiar with the book yet, can you tell us what it's about?
Yes, so this book is an exploration of how climate change is impacting the food system from paddock to plate, and also what are the solutions to deal with this problem that are captured in that food and farming system. So although this is a story explaining the challenge and complexity of climate change, it's also a story of hope and optimism and strategies to get ourselves out of this mess.
Which is what I love, because there are so many articles and stories and documentaries and keynote speeches and all the things that we're doing wrong. And yes, we're doing them wrong. But this is underpinned by exactly that. Here's also what we can look forward to and do about it. But look, this is a massive topic. Why did you want to write it?
Well, I guess I was looking for this book myself, in that I recognized that there was a gap in the story of how rural Australians and rural people around the world are being impacted by a changing climate, how that's impacting our food, how that then impacts everyone as we all eat food, and then what we can do every time we open the fridge door or sit down at the kitchen table to eat our meal. What do we need to be thinking about to help tackle this problem? So I guess with this book, I wanted to help present the science in an engaging way, bringing the humanity into the story of climate change, making this personal, local, making it urgent, and also helping the reader to feel empowered that they too can help tackle this problem.
So just to give listeners and viewers some context, what is your background in not only in the rural space, but also in the scientific space?
So I live on my family's property in far western New South Wales on the beautiful red sands of Untitled Country. And I came out here when I was 12 years old, when my family purchased our farm. And we came from Melbourne, from an urban, life. And I was just in awe of the landscape of the rural community, the horizons that go on forever, and sapphire blue skies, and the animals, the kangaroos that bound across the landscape. And as a 12-year-old, I fell head over heels in love with this place. And I also felt a really deep connection to this landscape, a sense of belonging to this raw, untamed environment. And with that sense of connection, a sense of responsibility that I have to look after this place too. My parents purchased in the year 2000, which was the start of the decade-long millennium drought, which at that time became known as the worst drought on record in Australia. And it was 10 years of little to no rainfall. So I watched the landscape dry out before my eyes. It becomes silent out here. The birds disappeared. I watched people in the rural community walk away, move to the cities, because it was becoming too distressing out here in amongst the drought and the dust storms and the heat waves. And I started to learn more about this term climate change and what that actually means, how humans are actually driving that. And I guess I then fell into the world of science, because I have a natural curiosity, always asking questions, leaning into the natural world and trying to understand what it is telling us and our place within it. So I started to learn more about agriculture, natural ecosystems, human interactions with it, and then climate change. And that has then really spurred me to stand up and speak about these issues and play a role in more of the communication and advocacy side of things.
Now, with the amount of study that you have done in, agriculture and science and climate change, you could have written a book that was far more technical or that was a bit more scientific. So when you thought, I'm going to write a book on this, what was the thought process in your head on determining what kind of book you wanted to write and what was going to be in it?
Well, it's quite funny you say that, because I had just come out of a 4.5-year PhD, and before that, a master's, and before that, a bachelor in science. And so I had been trained for a fair few years there on academic writing. And with, academic science writing, there is no emotion, there is no storytelling, there is no personal narrative in there. And it is about the presentation of facts and figures and charts and graphs. And this is what you need to know, full stop. I actually find that style of writing quite difficult. And that might explain why I really struggled with my PhD thesis for such a long time, because I really had to train and control myself to fit within that academic writing style. I finished that. I had a few months break, and then COVID really started to escalate here in Australia. And what I thought I was going to be doing for the next, year and a half suddenly vanished from my calendar. And I was sitting at home with a lot of free time. And I thought, oh, well, I'm computer fit and writing fit. I'm used to sitting at the desk for 8 hours a day. I've always wanted to write a book. I love writing. It's always been a passion of mine. And maybe I will. I'm so sorry, my phone is just ringing in the background.
That's okay. Oh. You go grab it. Oh, no more. I can't hear you. Interesting. You know what? You can hear me? So let's hang up, come back to the same link.
Did I just have my
no, you're back
on mute the whole time?
Now you're back.
Okay. I think I had it on mute.
Oh, no, but I heard all the rest.
Yeah, okay.
So right. I think go from, do you remember where you were up to?
Yeah, so it was about the academic writing and then the PhD.
Yes, but do you remember at what point you were up to, or do you want to?
Let me rewind a few sentences there and talk about.
Why don't we just start at that? Pretend I've just asked the question again. I know you're going to be repeating yourself, but just pretend I've just asked the question again. Okay. Yes.
So I had just come out of my PhD actually in 2019. And before doing my PhD, I had done a master's in sustainable agriculture, and before that, a bachelor in science. And so I had spent, a good decade almost writing in a very academic style. And in science writing, you do not have any emotion or personal narrative or storytelling. It is about facts and figures. It is about presenting data with statistics, with graphs, with figures. And I think that's why I found writing my PhD thesis quite challenging, because there wasn't a beautiful flow of narrative. And writing has always been a passion of mine. It's something that I've always wanted to do, to tell stories. But I guess I had never had the time in my calendar to do that. And it wasn't until the start of 2020, when the COVID situation really started to escalate here in Australia, that I suddenly had a large amount of time in my schedule to sit down, to open up all my notebooks that I had, been scribbling in over the years, points I'd jotted down of, oh, this is a great idea or a great concept. And I actually pulled that out and set to work of writing a book. And I literally sat on the floor with pieces of paper all around me, did a bit of a mind map, did a bit of a storyboard, like one would do if you're creating a film. How would the story flow? What would the characters be doing? Even sketching out little images. And I formed this overview of a book that I would love to write.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds to me that you wanted to avoid any of the academic type of writing, and that you wanted it to be a more personal story. And everyone, this book is deeply personal. But within it, you have also included information, interesting information and fairly complex topics that you've explained through personal stories. You say that you kind of mapped it out, but how did you determine what stories you wanted to include? How did you map out that cinematic view of the book?
Well, I actually did a fair bit of reading and research on storytelling and what is involved in the great stories, whether it's Lord of the Rings or, any of the classics that we have on the bookshelf. How does the plot, lie out on the pages? How do you build up that sense of tension? When do you relieve that tension and find, a sense of relief and conclusion? And so I did that story arc, and then I thought, okay, well, how does my story and the story of climate change fit within it? And it actually fits quite nicely in that in the beginning, I wasn't really concerned or aware of climate change. My life was, the average Australian life of pulling food off a supermarket shelf and enjoying weekends outdoors, but not much concern or consideration for the footprint I was having on the planet. And then I developed that awareness of, yes, I am actually having a footprint on the planet, and so is my sector, the agricultural industry. So are we as a global society. And that sort of builds up the tension in the story. And then I look at some of the factors that actually make this, which exacerbates the problem in terms of poor communication environments, dismissal of science, poor political narratives and policy. And then towards the end of the story, I talk about the actions. Well, how do we overcome these problems? What can you do? What can I do? And I bring it back sort of full circle in that the second last chapter, I'm back at home on the farm planting trees, and this is my effort and my vision for the world too.
Now, you kind of had the benefit of COVID in the sense that you were able to devote time to mapping this out. So you map it out, and now it's time to write it. Can you give us an idea of, on a practical level, how you achieved all of the words on the page? Did you write it over a long period of time? Did you write it over a short period of time? Did you have any targets or word counts that you wanted to reach? What did you do? How much time did you spend on it each day?
Definitely in the beginning, it was a bit of a haphazard approach. I had never attempted to write a book before. I suddenly was writing a book. COVID happened. I started sketching out this idea. I was then approached by a publishing house and a contract was signed. It happened within the space of 2 to 3 months. And suddenly I had a 6-month deadline to deliver a manuscript. And so I actually went, wow, okay, this is happening. There's no time to delay. But in those early weeks, I guess I was, working out what are the themes, what are the emotions I want the reader to feel at the various chapters. what the tone, whether it's, you know, calmness or urgency or relief, where that fits within the story. It was a bit later on, sort of a few months into the process, that I realized that I couldn't tell the story properly by myself. And I needed other voices in there, people from along the food system, to really enrich this story and to bring in their perspectives, their concerns, their vision. And so I realized, my goodness, I'm going to have to do some interviews for this book and include those other narratives in here. And I literally like opened up my atlas at home and went like, okay, I need someone from this region of the world and this region of the world. And I need someone from this part of the food system, you know, on the farm. I need the scientist, I need the advocate, I need the nutritionist. And then I just got to work of trying to find those people. And I reached out to a lot of people. And the people who responded were just so incredibly generous with their time and on board with, my goodness, yes, this is a book that has to be written and I would love to help you write it.
Wow, brilliant. Okay, so one of the dangers of, and you've included, you know, some fantastic stories in here of, as you say, people who are not you, including your own stories. But one of the dangers when you interview people for a book is that, you know, you could arrange it, you could find them, you can research them, and then you interview them and they're really boring. Or they may not be boring, but they're just not relevant enough. What they say is not relevant enough for your particular topic and theme. So firstly, did you experience that at all? And also then how did you kind of decide who made the cut? Because I'm assuming not everyone made the cut. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, that's right. No, not everyone made the cut. But even the people that I spoke to who didn't make the cut, they reinforced that this was a very important topic that needs to be told. But they might not have met the cut for various reasons, in that I had too many farmer stories, and so I needed to strategically remove a few of them. Or some people that I interviewed had very limited English, and so I couldn't do their story justice. I couldn't tell it properly in the way that it needed to be told. And so I guess with writing too, one has to be quite, sorry. I guess in writing, you have to be quite ruthless too, in like what is actually best for the book and telling this narrative. And you do sometimes have to sacrifice stories or characters from it, so you actually have the best, most complete, most compelling story to tell.
Now, at some point you did the creative nonfiction course at the Australian Writers' Centre. Why did you decide to do it, and what did you get out of it that was helpful in writing your book?
So I sent off a very early draft to my publisher, and she responded with, "It's wonderful, it's great, keep on going. But in parts, you're still very academic. It's still presenting climate change in an abstract way. It's not very engaging. Whereas other chapters, I can see you've poured your heart and soul in here. Like I know who you are in this chapter, but other chapters, it's a bit jarring the way that I'm writing." And I too, when I was reading my, draft manuscript, I was going, yeah, it's just not, gelling properly. There's not a beautiful, seamless flow through this book. So I started, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, reading articles online on how to improve narrative when you're writing about a nonfiction topic. And I tried to look for examples in climate change books, and they're fairly few and far between, being told in this way. So then I sort of started to look, more broadly at genres, nonfiction genres, but that have included a personal narrative. Anyway, one day when I was doing my online research, I came across the Australian Writers' Centre, and I was looking through the courses and I was reading the testimonials, and I thought, this is absolutely what I need. These are the questions that I have, and this course is going to answer for me. And so I signed up, and I was incredibly excited about it. And yeah, I lay on the floor listening to it. I had my notebook out, doing all the activities, coming back to the activities the following day after I had reflected on them. So I was really doing my homework. And constantly I was then jumping back into my manuscript and going, okay, well, I'm going to add a bit more detail to this character, or I'm going to like end this chapter with a bit of a cliffhanger. So I was learning these techniques and then I was applying them into my manuscript. And by the time I finished the creative nonfiction course, I just felt so much more confident in my writing. I really felt like, yes, I should and I can call myself a writer now. And I'm going to apply this knowledge into this book, and this book's going to be so much better because of it.
That's wonderful to hear. Now, one of the things about writing nonfiction is, especially in a book that tackles climate change, is making complex stories into language that everyone can grasp easily. What thought process did you go through to figure out an approach to do that?
It's kind of a funny one, and I would say Twitter has helped me a lot, and social media has helped me a lot. Because for the last decade or so, I've been staring very closely at the science, as well as doing my own research, both in Australia and internationally, writing up that research and evidence, creating new knowledge, but presenting it always in that academic, university style. But then I'm also very active on social media, and people just want something, a bite-sized chunk to get it, and they would love it if it's accompanied with a beautiful 30-second video or a nice landscape photo. And so that's what I do. I understand the science, I look at it closely, and then something will really resonate with me, like a stat will jump out and I'll go, so that's why we're losing the birds from my farm. And then I'll write a little tweet of, I miss the sound of birds and the photo of a bird. And people go, that like, I feel that sadness or that pain or longing to hear the sound of birds again. So I do really believe in, as bizarre as it sounds, the power of using social media and the training that gives people using social media to make something complex and big very concise and presented in a bite-sized chunk. And people are only going to like it or follow it or tweet, retweet it if it is engaging, if it is actually struck a chord with you. So, with limited characters on the social media platforms, one has to get very good at succinctly translating a complex message like climate change into a bite-sized chunk that someone can pick up and go away with.
Okay. So what, in terms of writing this book, apart from telling people about complex ideas in easy to understand language, what was the most challenging aspect of writing this book?
Probably two things. One of it was belief in self, that I could do it. I had never written a book before. Bits and pieces that I had written were, for my own little website or, a poem for a family member at a birthday. I hadn't written a proper, real life novel, book about a topic like this. So I guess I had to overcome that self-doubt and that questioning whether I could. Although I do also think that questioning and self-doubt actually encourages us to do our research properly and to learn the skills and to constantly check in, is this the best that it can be? The second most challenging part of the book, and it could probably be the first challenging one, is that I felt a great sense of responsibility, a huge sense of responsibility telling this story, telling it well, telling it in a way that engaged people, but also telling the stories of the people I interviewed. In that, spoke with a Nigerian fish farmer. I spoke with a young Argentine sheep farmer. I spoke with an elderly Canadian bison farmer. These people really are on the front lines of climate change. And in their stories, they do have real concern of what food insecurity means to their communities, real sadness in the way that their environment is changing before their eyes. And that is a responsibility of me taking their story and then sharing it in a way that is honest and it is authentic. And they've given me that story to help change this world for the better. And that's what I want this book to do.
Because you've not just written a book, you have planted the seed of a movement. So what do you feel is your next step? No pressure.
I'm going to be communicating this issue for a long time, I can tell. And there's a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of gaps in the way that this story is being told and the level of engagement to the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced. I would love to keep on writing, like it really is a passion of mine. And I love the intersect of art and science. You know, we have this wealth of evidence and knowledge being produced by researchers. How do we as creatives, whether it's writers, poets, filmmakers, artists, sculptors, puppeteers, how do we use that really important information we have about the world to capture people's hearts and minds and inspire behavior change? So that's where I want to work.
Wow. Now, you've mentioned that, you know, you've interviewed people like the fish farmer in Nigeria or the bison farmer in Canada, but it's also your stories that are in here. And sometimes when we write our own stories, we often, I know, because I hear this all the time from people who do write their own stories, they fear that they're navel gazing, or they fear, would anyone be interested in this story? How did you determine which stories from your life were going to be essentially worthy of being in this book?
It's interesting because I listened to some pretty, I guess, on reflection, poor podcasts that really said, you know, if you write a memoir, you've got to have an interesting life because no one really cares about you or what's happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this true? Is no one going to care about my story? And, you know, I did hear this from a few podcasts sort of saying, you know, unless you're Barack Obama or the Queen of England, you know, no one's going to pick up your memoir. And so I really had to sit back and think, okay, well, what parts of my story do I need to tell to enrich this book? And I am naturally quite an introverted person, and putting myself, you know, in the public eye for public scrutiny does not come naturally to me at all. And I avoid it at all costs, and did avoid it at all costs until I really recognized that if I wanted to play a more meaningful role in climate change and communication, then there has to be a personal story in there. There has to be a person that the viewer, the audience, the reader can relate to and go, okay, I get it. That's the human story. That is someone who experiences the emotions, the triumphs and joys, as well as the heartbreak and sadness. So I boldly, bravely opened the pages to my family. You know, I write about my grandmother and, you know, sitting on her lap. I talk about a family illness that really rocked my world at the time. I describe, you know, the challenges that my family have faced and gone through during the droughts, and how that's really made me question what I'm doing and who I am and what I should do. And I guess in a way, I want to use my story as a bit of a role model for the reader to go, oh, so she didn't know what to do either to begin with. Oh, she didn't really get the science either. That's like me, but I can see her working this out in her mind and her actions, and I can see her going up and down in, you know, in the grief of the challenge, as well as the joys of seeing something working well. And I want those emotions that I feel and write about in the book to be mirrored in the reader. So by the time they end up in those final chapters, where I do talk about actions that we can take, the vision that I have, what we need to be doing as individuals and communities, that the reader will close the book and go, yeah, I feel empowered. I feel like I can and I should do something.
Great. Now you've come out the other end. You've conceptualized the book, you planned it out, you've written it, you've rewritten it, and it's now published and getting fantastic coverage as well. So congratulations on that. So now that you've come out the other end, what would your top 3 tips be for people who are listening to this who would love to write their own creative nonfiction book one day?
Definitely do a course, do your research, learn as much as you can, but also get started. I think we're so often thinking, you know, now's not the right time. I'm not the right person. I don't have the right voice. Someone else would do it better, so I'll leave it to them. The world can't wait for us anymore, to be honest. And when we look at the challenges that are presented, the opportunities that are out there sort of within our fingertips, we actually really do need to be communicating those things and inspiring each other to reach out and grasp those opportunities, to tweak the system so it is better. And, you know, in nonfiction writing, we are talking about real subjects and real people and real issues. So we have to be writing these, you know, all of these topics, whether it is to do with climate change or food security or plastic pollution or, you know, name your global challenge or local or national challenges. There's many out there to be written about. And then find your unique voice and story and insert it in there. And I guess reflect on why that topic has resonated with you. And I think that's when it sort of, you know, all comes to light. This story, climate change, resonates with me because when I walk out into the paddock and surrounded by the red sand horizons and I see this incredible wildlife, like I feel this sense of love and this belonging and this responsibility to look after this place. And that's why I care about climate change. And that's why I write about climate change. And I will tell my story to engage other people in this issue so we can help tackle this problem.
I love it. Congratulations on your book, Our Sunburnt Country. Not only are you a fantastic author, Anika, you're a game changer. I mean, your thoughts and ideas and insights are game changing. And I truly believe you're the voice of the new generation. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.